When a group of arrogant men began threatening two German shepherds in a quiet neighborhood, they thought they were just scaring off a pair of helpless pets. But what they didn't know, what would soon leave one of them bleeding and the rest frozen in terror, was that those dogs were elite canines, trained to take down armed criminals in seconds, and this time, they weren't going to back down. The town of Everpine was the kind of place where change came slow and grudges lingered long after the news cycle moved on. Tucked between old oak forests and dusty back roads, most of its residents knew one another, or at least knew enough to mind their business. But when Emma moved into the edge of town with her two German shepherds, Titan and Shadow, the peace that defined Everpine began to crack. Emma wasn't from around there. She was young, sharp-eyed, and confident, an ex-military dog handler turned vet tech who kept mostly to herself. Her dogs were quiet but alert, large and imposing, yet obedient as statues when she gave the word. Some of the townspeople admired them, especially the kids who waved every time she walked past. But not everyone shared that fondness. A small group of men, mostly young, entitled and bored, began whispering among themselves. They didn't like the idea of killer dogs living near them. They saw Emma as an outsider bringing danger into their safe little world, and instead of staying away, they chose confrontation. At first, it was petty, shouting from passing trucks, loud revs of engines late at night. But soon things escalated. One evening, Emma returned from work to find her trash scattered and red spray paint on her fence. No beasts allowed. She knew exactly who did it. But she didn't call the cops. She simply turned to Titan and Shadow and said one word: guard. What the bullies didn't know was that Emma's dogs had served on active duty. They were trained in crowd control, scent detection, and close quarters takedown. They weren't just pets, they were soldiers. And when the confrontation finally came, let's just say Everpine would never forget what happened next. The following morning, the sun rose sluggishly over Everpine. Emma's property sat on the edge of the woods, the kind of place where birdsong still echoed and mist curled along the tree line. But the beauty of that dawn was broken by the tension that now weighed over her home like fog. Emma sipped her coffee from the front steps, eyes scanning the road. Titan lay stretched at her feet, his chest rising steadily, while Shadow remained near the fence, ears twitching at every sound. The vandalism the night before hadn't rattled Emma. She had seen worse during her years stationed overseas, but what unsettled her was the thought that these men thought her dogs were vulnerable, that they could intimidate them and walk away with no consequence. She wouldn't allow that, not to her boys. By mid-morning, Emma called a friend, Mark, a retired police officer who had worked with Titan during active service. He arrived within the hour, greeting the dogs with familiarity and affection. "Same punks as always?" he asked, kneeling to rub Shadow behind the ears. Emma nodded. "They're getting bolder. Last night was a warning. They'll come back." Mark's eyes narrowed. They don't know what they're dealing with. Later that day, Emma made a decision. She walked through her backyard, adjusted the perimeter camera angles, reinforced the gate, and checked the training drills with the dogs. It wasn't about revenge, it was about preparedness. If they wanted to push, she would not retreat. That night, as the town grew still and lights flicked off one by one, a pair of trucks rolled slowly down the road, their engines humming low. Inside, 3 young men leaned forward, eyes fixed on Emma's house. One of them, Rick, the ringleader with a buzz cut and something to prove, lit a cigarette and sneered. "Just scare 'em a little," he muttered. "Make her take those mutts and leave." They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They hopped the fence. Shadow was the first to notice. He didn't bark. He moved like a shadow himself, circling around the back where the noise had come from. Titan stood alert beside the porch, head turning slowly as he picked up the scent. Emma, already awake, watched silently from the upstairs window. She didn't call the police. Instead, she whispered one word into the intercom connected to their collars: "Engage." In less than a second, the peaceful yard transformed. Shadow emerged from the dark, a blur of precision and force. One of the intruders, startled, fell backward into the dirt, screaming. Titan leapt the garden fence with terrifying speed, intercepting Rick before he reached the porch. The dog didn't bite, yet He pinned the man with sheer body weight and growled with a rumble that came from somewhere deep and primal. "Get him off me!" Rick shouted, frozen under Titan's weight. But Emma didn't move. She waited until the third man, who had tried to climb a tree, realized there was no escape. Then she opened the door. "Good boys," she said, calm and sharp. "Hold." Both dogs remained in position, alert and controlled. It was over in seconds, but for the boys, it felt like hours. Emma called the sheriff not to press charges, but to document what had happened. She wanted a record. The officers arrived, found the boys still shaking, and quickly realized the truth. These weren't just dogs. These were working animals, highly trained and within their legal rights to defend the property. Sheriff Dunley pulled Emma aside. "You sure you don't want to press charges? We've been waiting for an excuse to straighten those boys out." She shook her head. "They're humiliated. That'll last longer than a fine." Before leaving, one of the officers, wide-eyed, asked quietly, "Where'd you get dogs like that?" Emma just smiled. They earned their stripes far from here. But what Emma didn't know was that the humiliation that night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, and soon the town itself would be divided over what really happened in her yard. The story of the vigilante dogs spread fast through Everpine. By morning, whispers floated through the diner, the mechanic's shop, even the church foyer. The older folks nodded with quiet respect. Many remembered Emma's father, a decorated vet who'd trained dogs for combat long before it was common. But among the younger crowd, and especially the ones with something to prove, the tone was different. "Overkill," someone muttered in line at the post office. "They're just dogs, man," another scoffed outside the gas station. "What kind of freak trains animals like that?" At the center of this rising tension was Rick, bruised in pride and ego. Humiliation hadn't humbled him. It had ignited something darker. He spun a new story, one where he was the victim of a woman with killer dogs and a vendetta. He told anyone who'd listened that he'd only been checking on her fence after seeing something strange, and slowly, disturbingly, a group began to form, those who shared Rick's contempt. They began calling themselves the cleanup crew. Online, they joked about Emma's dogs being monsters. In person, they scrawled insults on her mailbox, left fake animal control notices on her fence, even tried to file complaints with the city council. Emma stayed silent through all of it. She knew a storm was coming, and she was preparing. Inside her home, Titan and Shadow began responding to new drills. Emma added scent tracking back into their regimen, reinforced hand signal commands, and spent hours walking the perimeter with them at dusk. She spoke little during those walks, but the dogs watched her closely, sensing her focus, mirroring it. One evening, as orange light bathed the woods, a figure stepped out onto her property. It was Sheriff Dunley. "I came to talk," he said, adjusting his hat as Titan trotted silently beside him. Curious but not aggressive. Emma met him at the porch. "About?" "The town council's been pressured to call a hearing. Rick's parents are throwing money at the problem. They're saying your dogs are a danger to the community. There's going to be a vote." Emma didn't flinch. "When?" "Friday night. Public forum. You'll be allowed to speak." She gave a slow nod, but her eyes never left the woods behind the sheriff. "Then I'll be there." What she didn't say, but both of them understood, was this: she wouldn't come alone. Friday night arrived with a cold bite in the air. The town hall filled early, the room buzzing with anticipation. On one side, Rick and a handful of angry faces, those who felt the town was being taken over by war dogs. On the other, veterans, dog handlers, quiet citizens who'd seen Emma's dogs patrolling during the floods last year and knew better. Emma arrived in full uniform, not her military one, her K9 unit jacket from the sheriff's department years back. Titan and Shadow walked at her side, leashed, calm, impeccable. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "They're massive." Rick smirked from his corner seat. "This'll be good." A councilman banged the gavel and opened the floor. "We are here to determine whether the animals kept by Miss Emma Carter represent a safety concern for the community." He hadn't even finished the sentence when a man stood up in the back. "I'd like to testify." Heads turned. It was Officer Daniels, from a neighboring town. He approached, eyes firm. I've served on the force 12 years. I've worked with dozens of canine units. These two? He nodded at Titan and Shadow. They're elite. They saved 3 officers during a drug raid in Asheville. They don't bite unless commanded. They don't chase unless authorized. What happened the other night was not an attack, it was restraint. More murmurs. Emma remained silent, letting the moment carry its weight. Then Rick stood. She turned those things on me like attack robots. I didn't even do anything. Daniels folded his arms. Your fingerprints were on the pry bar left at the back gate. Rick's face turned pale. Emma finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but razor sharp. If I wanted to hurt someone, I'd call the police. If I wanted to protect myself, I'd rely on the animals who've been trained better than most people in this room. The question isn't if my dogs are dangerous. The question is, why would you walk into my yard uninvited in the dead of night? The room went still, and from the far end, someone stood up slowly. A woman no one recognized. She had something to say, and it would change everything. The woman who stood up was tall, with silver-streaked hair tied in a bun and a badge clipped to her hip. She didn't need to introduce herself. Her presence was commanding, her voice cool and unwavering. I'm Captain Linda Rowe, retired UCO Air Force, K-9 Division, she began. And I trained Titan and Shadow when they were only 11 months old. The room hushed. Even those in the back leaned forward. I've handled explosive detection dogs, search and rescue units in war zones, and military dogs during peacetime operations. I know aggression. I know danger. These two are neither. She glanced toward Emma, then toward Rick. They are protectors, calm, controlled, loyal beyond comprehension. But if you corner them or their handler, they will act, and they should. A woman from the council interrupted, voice quivering slightly. Captain Rowe, are you saying their response was justified? Rowe nodded. Absolutely. Emma Carter is one of the best canine handlers I've ever seen. Her bond with those dogs isn't casual. It's tactical, emotional, and earned. I'd trust them to guard my grandchildren. That comment landed heavily in the room. Even Rick's allies exchanged glances, doubt beginning to creep in. But Rick wasn't done. He stood up abruptly, eyes darting. Why should we listen to any of you? He spat. They're dogs. They don't belong in neighborhoods. You think because they can sniff a bomb, they're saints. Captain Rowe's expression remained calm, but her tone darkened. No, she said. Not saints. Soldiers. She turned to the audience. Do you remember the gas leak at the mill last summer? The one that nearly leveled the West Block? A few nods. These two found the leak before it hit critical. While Rick and his friends were mocking Emma online, her dogs were saving this town. Whispers swept through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Rick opened his mouth to counter, but froze when Shadow took a step forward. Not aggressive, not growling, just focused, alert. Emma placed a hand on the dog's back, a gentle signal, and Shadow eased. Then a soft voice from the front row rose. I was at the mill. My cousin worked the night shift. He said he owed his life to that dog. Another stood. They helped my mother during the flood. She was trapped in her car. Shadow barked until someone found her. One by one, voices joined. Stories surfaced. Testimonials. Evidence of the quiet work these dogs had done. Never for recognition, only for duty. Rick backed toward the door, visibly shaken. You people are insane, he muttered, before slipping out into the night. With the room quiet again, the councilwoman took a breath. We will convene privately and issue a formal decision in 48 hours. Emma nodded silently and left the building the way she'd entered, flanked by her two shadows, calm and ready. Outside, a small crowd followed her into the parking lot. You okay? Someone asked. Emma gave a slight smile. They're not the ones I'm worried about. Captain Rowe stepped beside her. You handled that well. I just did what needed to be done. The captain looked down at the dogs. They still remember me, Emma smirked. Try giving Shadow a piece of jerky. See what happens. Sure enough, as Rowe held out a treat, Shadow gave one low tail wag before gently accepting it, eyes flicking up in recognition. They never forget, Rowe whispered. That night, back home, Emma stood by the back porch and watched her dogs patrol the perimeter, ears perked, alert to every branch, every sound. The stars overhead were dim, but the air was still, peaceful. She exhaled slowly, but just before she stepped inside, her phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, just 2 words, round 2. She stared at the message, brows furrowed, then looked toward the woods. Shadow was already growling, quiet and low. Something or someone was out there. The next morning, Emma didn't follow her usual route. Something about the message from the night before had unsettled her. She wasn't paranoid, but she had spent years learning to recognize when things didn't feel right. Instinct wasn't a superstition. It was training, experience, muscle memory wrapped around a gut feeling. Shadow and Titan, ever alert, walked on either side of her as she headed into town. It was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday morning. The usual sounds of kids biking, dogs barking in yards, and neighbors chatting over coffee were absent. Curtains were drawn, doors shut. She reached the corner cafe where she always picked up breakfast. The sign said open, but the lights were dim. When she pushed the door, it creaked open slightly, unlocked, but empty. "Hello?" she called out, cautiously. No response. She was about to turn back when she noticed a note taped to the counter. It was addressed to her. "You don't belong here. Take your animals and go. You've been warned." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was sharp, deliberate. Someone had taken their time with it. Emma folded the note and slid it into her pocket, scanning the room one more time. Nothing out of place. Just that eerie silence. Outside, Shadow was tense, his nose high, sniffing the air. Titan stood firm, his body positioned protectively in front of Emma. She moved quickly back to her truck. By noon, the air was hot and still. She kept her doors locked, windows shut. Normally, this town was uneventful, nothing more than potlucks and school fairs, but the undercurrent of tension now ran deep. Something had shifted. She spent the afternoon reviewing footage from her porch cameras. She saw it then, 3:12 a.m. A figure walking along the fence line, male, tall, hoodie pulled up. No attempt to break in, just a slow, deliberate walk. But he'd stopped, right by the back gate, and turned toward the camera. Smiling, Emma reported the threat. The police took a statement, reviewed the footage, but without a face and without a clear crime, there wasn't much they could do. "Probably a prank," the officer said, handing her back the USB drive. "Still, we'll keep an eye out." She nodded, but she knew better. This wasn't a prank, it was a test, a message. That evening, she took the dogs for a walk, keeping to the main road, but half a mile in, she heard it, tires squealing behind her. A beat-up truck barreled down the road, blaring music. As it neared, someone in the back shouted, "Better watch out, dog lady!" A glass bottle flew from the passenger side window. It shattered near Titan's feet. He didn't flinch, but his ears pinned back, and his eyes locked on the truck as it sped off. Emma knelt beside the glass, checking his paws. No cuts, but her heart was racing. A few neighbors had come out of their homes, watching silently. No one approached. No one helped. Back home, she paced the living room, staring at the text again. Round 2. She wasn't afraid, but she was angry now. Not just for herself, but for what this meant. These men weren't just ignorant. They were escalating. Titan laid his head on her lap. Shadow paced by the window, tail stiff, eyes trained on the driveway. That's when she made the call. "Linda," she said when the line picked up, "I think it's time." "Time for what?" Emma's voice was low, steady. "To show them what a K9 unit is really capable of." Outside, headlights appeared on the horizon. Too slow to be casual, too early for a visit. Titan sat up. Shadow growled. Emma stood and reached for her belt. If they wanted war, they had just picked the wrong handler. The truck crawled to a stop just beyond Emma's driveway, its engine rumbling like a provocation. No one got out at first. The windows were tinted, masking the faces inside. But the dogs didn't need to see. They could smell the tension, the oily blend of aggression and adrenaline wafting from the vehicle. Emma stepped onto the porch, no fear in her posture, no hesitation. Her stance was one honed through years of field training and high-risk situations, the kind that told anyone watching, "I am not the prey here." Shadow stood to her right, posture tall, eyes locked. Titan sat at her left, calm but coiled like a spring. Their canine training wasn't just about obedience, it was about intuition, judgment, restraint, and, when needed, controlled fury. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out, maybe mid-30s, with a cigarette tucked behind his ear and a grin too smug for someone clearly outmatched. Another man got out from the driver's side, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind who mistook intimidation for power. "You the one who called the cops," the driver said, voice laced with mockery. Emma didn't answer. The passenger continued, "Heard you been running your mouth, showing videos, stirring up trouble with your fancy mutts." Emma remained silent, letting the stillness hang between them. It was Titan who broke it. Low, deep growl from within his chest. Not a bark, a warning, a line drawn in the dirt. "You think they're gonna protect you?" the man said, stepping forward. "You think we're scared of dogs?" Still, Emma didn't speak. The man took another step. "We grew up around mutts. We know how to deal with them." Shadow barked. One sharp, controlled sound, enough to make the man flinch, and then Emma spoke, calm, quiet, deadly. "They're not mutts. They're canine." For a second, the words didn't land. But then something shifted. The driver's eyes narrowed. "Canine, like military dogs." Emma gave a single nod. Shadow served in Kandahar. Titan worked search and rescue at Ground Zero and riot containment in Portland. "You sure you want to test what they remember?" The silence was heavy now. The men hesitated. The facade of confidence cracked, but it was already too late. Shadow lunged, not to attack, but to position himself between Emma and the approaching man, pushing him back with sheer presence. Titan moved next, circling to the side, cutting off their retreat without a sound. It wasn't violence, it was choreography. An unspoken language only those who had served understood. The men froze, not from fear of teeth, but from something deeper. Recognition. Of discipline, of purpose, of what it meant to face something bred not for chaos but for control. The driver raised his hands. "We didn't mean nothing, just messing around." Emma's voice was ice. "You threatened federal service animals. That's not a prank, that's a felony." The passenger opened his mouth to argue, but a deep bark from Titan shut him down. The truck peeled off moments later, leaving behind only tire marks and a silence thick with retreat. Inside, Emma finally exhaled. She poured herself a glass of water, hands steady again. Shadow and Titan, now relaxed, lay at her feet like sentinels at rest. But she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. She walked over to the old storage chest in the hallway, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath medals, unit patches, and folded flags, lay a collar. Not a regular one. It was black, with a silver tag engraved, "Service K9, do not pet, trained for defense." It had once belonged to Titan's partner, Rex, who had saved 2 Marines from an ambush before falling in combat. Emma clipped it to her belt, a symbol, a reminder. These dogs weren't just pets. They were soldiers, veterans, heroes, and anyone who dared threaten them would soon learn what it meant to underestimate loyalty forged in war. As Emma shut the chest, her phone buzzed. A new message, unknown number, just 3 words. "Round 3 begins." The message rattled her more than she expected. "Round 3 begins." It was vague, but intentional, meant to unnerve her, not inform. She stared at the screen, jaw clenched, then turned to Shadow and Titan. They were already standing, alert again. They felt it too. Something was coming. Emma locked the front door and began checking the windows, not out of panic, but preparedness. She'd lived through IEDs in Helmand and civil unrest back home. She wasn't the kind to overreact. But when dogs trained for battlefield survival became uneasy, she listened. Outside, night was falling fast. The horizon bathed in blood orange and ash-gray clouds. The wind had picked up, rustling dry leaves and snapping tree branches with a little too much force. The calm before something else. Something deliberate. She moved to the back porch, where the motion sensor lights flickered on. Nothing visible. But that didn't mean it was safe. Shadow was pacing. Titan had his head low, sniffing the air, ears twitching like radar dishes. Emma reached into the utility drawer and pulled out her old flashlight and a roll of gaffer tape. She taped the flashlight to a broom handle, makeshift but effective. Then she slipped a compact pistol into her jacket, not because she expected to use it, but because the last time she didn't, someone got hurt. The dogs didn't bark. They never did unless it was necessary. But the way they positioned themselves, flanking her as she stepped outside, spoke volumes. Down the hill behind the cabin was a trail that led to the old mill, abandoned years ago. A place known to locals, a place someone could hide. She whistled once, short and sharp. The dogs followed silently, their movements low and fluid, like water pouring through tall grass. They reached the trailhead, and Emma paused, kneeling briefly. She placed 2 fingers in the dirt. Fresh tracks, boots, at least 2 people, and one of them was dragging something. She rose, heart thudding, not from fear but focus. They moved quickly now. No talking, no lights, only instinct and training. Halfway down the path, Titan suddenly halted. His nose pressed to the earth, then jerked up, a low whine. Emma turned sharply. There, barely visible, was a length of fishing wire strung between 2 trees, ankle height. A tripwire. She cursed under her breath and carefully stepped over it, motioning to the dogs. Whoever they were dealing with, they weren't just punks anymore. They were organized, or worse, desperate. Minutes later, they reached the mill. The place was silent, windows shattered. Roof caved in on one side. Emma crouched behind a tree and listened. Then came the sound, barely audible, a whimper. From inside, she felt a spike of cold adrenaline shoot through her. She motioned to Shadow to circle left and Titan to hold. Then she slipped around the side of the building, scanning each angle, each opening. Another whimper, closer now. She crept to the open doorway and saw her, a young woman, maybe 20, hands bound, mouth gagged, eyes wide with fear. Next to her, a chain looped around a support beam, and tied to it, struggling to reach her, was a young German shepherd, no more than 2 years old, whining, pulling, desperate. Emma stepped in silently, drew her blade, and cut the girl loose. The shepherd didn't bark. He just stared, tail wagging hesitantly, as if unsure whether this was help or another trap. But then Shadow entered. The younger dog saw him and immediately relaxed. He recognized his kind. Training, brotherhood, trust. The girl sobbed as Emma removed the gag. They said they'd come back. They said they'd hurt him first, then me. Not anymore, Emma said softly, untying the dog. He licked her hand once, then pressed against the girl's side and refusing to leave her. Shadow was already signaling. A faint growl. Someone was coming. Emma pulled the girl and the dog behind a crumbled wall and signaled Titan. Seconds later, footsteps. 2 figures, hooded, armed with bats. Emma stepped out just as they entered the open space. They didn't even see her coming. Titan flanked from the side, Shadow from behind. It was over in seconds. No bites, no injuries, just pure canine control, takedowns without bloodshed. Precision. As Emma called it into the sheriff, her phone buzzed again. Same number. This time, the message wasn't vague. It read, "You're protecting the wrong dogs." Some secrets weren't meant to survive. Emma stared at the message, her breath catching for just a second. You're protecting the wrong dogs. Some secrets weren't meant to survive. What did they mean? What secrets? Her mind raced. It wasn't just harassment anymore. This wasn't about bullies picking on dogs out of ignorance. This was coordinated, calculated, and somehow it was tied to her dog's past. She turned to Shadow and Titan. They were calm now, alert but not tense. The younger dog, Rex, stood beside the rescued girl, nuzzling her hand for reassurance. He wasn't just any stray, that much was now clear. Emma sat beside the girl on a bench near the cabin, a thermal blanket draped around her shoulders. Sheriff Donovan had arrived minutes earlier and taken the 2 assailants into custody, but even he seemed uneasy. "You're sure you've never seen them before?" he asked Emma. She shook her head. "Not them. But someone else is pulling the strings. Donovan rubbed the back of his neck. The dogs. Yours and the young one. They acted like trained military units. They are... Donovan raised an eyebrow. Emma hesitated, then finally said, Shadow and Titan served overseas. Mine for years. The young one, Rex. He recognized commands I never gave him. That's not a coincidence. Donovan leaned in, whispering, You think this is deeper? Emma nodded. I think someone wants these dogs silenced. She didn't say it out loud, but she was starting to remember a file. One from her final mission. A transport manifest gone missing. 6 dogs listed, 3 returned, all listed as decommissioned. But what if they weren't? Later that evening, as the girl, whose name was Kayla, rested inside, Emma sat on the porch steps. The air was crisp, and the stars above were sharp against the night. Shadow lay beside her, tail thumping every so often in that low, content rhythm. Titan sat guard, ever the sentinel. She pulled out her old encrypted drive from a toolbox. She hadn't touched it in years. Plugged into her laptop, it took a few tries before it opened. But when it did, the names hit her like a punch. Shadow, Active Titan, Active Rex, MIA Alpha, KIA Blitz, MIA Ranger, Unknown. Rex was one of them. One of the 6 elite dogs in her old unit's K9 division. She closed her eyes, piecing it together. Rex had somehow escaped whatever fate had befallen the others, and now someone was trying to eliminate the remaining evidence. Titan let out a low growl, breaking her focus. Headlights, a truck, unfamiliar. Emma stood, resting a hand on Titan's back. It rolled slowly into the gravel path and came to a full stop. The door opened. Out stepped a man, late 50s, grey hair, military posture, eyes that had seen war. Emma Carter, he called, his voice firm. Who's asking? I'm Colonel Briggs, retired. I ran Project Valkyrie. She felt her stomach tighten. That was it. The name of the unit no one talked about. He approached slowly, hands visible. I've been looking for those dogs for years, he said. Not to harm them, but to protect what they were part of, to keep them out of the wrong hands. And those kids in the woods? Was that your version of protection? No, he said flatly. That wasn't us. That was them. The ones who wanted to turn these animals into weapons beyond the battlefield. They were going to auction them. K9s bred for war, sold to the highest bidder. Emma's fists clenched. They're not weapons. They're soldiers, partners. Briggs nodded. I agree. That's why I came. To help you find the rest. Cliffhanger finale del blocco. Before Emma could respond, a sharp crack echoed from the woods. A gunshot, followed by the sound of something crashing through the trees. Titan sprang up, ears locked on the direction. Colonel Briggs didn't flinch. He muttered just one word. They found us. The forest that had once felt like a refuge now pressed in on all sides, thick with shadows and tension. Emma moved swiftly, silently, her instincts from deployment kicking in. She signaled to Colonel Briggs to stay low. Titan advanced ahead, his body close to the ground, muscles taut like coiled steel. Shadow followed at her side, nose twitching with alertness. They had only minutes, maybe less. Whoever had fired that shot wasn't some random hunter. This was coordinated, a breach. From inside the cabin, Kayla screamed. Emma turned on instinct and sprinted back, her boots crunching over pine needles and frost. Titan overtook her in a blur, crashing through the half-open door like a battering ram. She followed and froze. The interior was chaos. One of the masked men, different from the earlier attackers, had Kayla cornered near the fireplace. He held a taser in one hand, a black duffel in the other. The contents spilled slightly. Tranquilizer vials, syringes. He hadn't expected the dogs to return so fast. Titan launched at him with precision. No bark, no hesitation. He hit the intruder center mass, knocking him to the floor. The taser skittered across the wooden boards. Shadow followed, snarling, standing guard over Kayla with a protective stance Emma hadn't seen since combat. Colonel Briggs arrived next, securing the room in seconds. He handcuffed the intruder, who was still gasping under Titan's weight. "Who sent you?" Briggs demanded. Silence. Emma stepped closer. "We know it's connected to Project Valkyrie. We know about the auctions. Who's buying?" The man spat blood and laughed weakly. "You think this ends with me? You think that mutt's the only one they want back?" His eyes flicked toward Rex, who had emerged from the side hallway, growling low. Rex recognized the man. He didn't charge, but he didn't back down either. Something passed between them, and Emma could feel it. Pain, betrayal. "He used to train them," Briggs murmured. "This guy, he was there in Nevada when they ran live-fire obedience trials." Emma stiffened. "And what? They turned on him?" "No," the man said. "They obeyed too well. That was the problem. No one asked if they wanted to follow. We just assumed they would." Briggs yanked him to his feet. "You're coming with us. And you're going to name names." But outside, a different sound interrupted the moment. Tires screeching on gravel. A convoy. Too many engines for it to be coincidence. Emma ran to the window and felt her breath freeze. 4 black SUVs. Men in tactical gear stepping out. No insignia, no badges. Rex let out a sharp bark. Shadow mirrored it. "We have to go," Emma said. "Now." Briggs nodded. "Back door, through the woods." "I'll hold them." Emma grabbed Kayla, shielding her. "You're not staying behind." He smiled faintly. "I trained these dogs too, you know. But I'm no use running. You get them to safety. I'll buy time." Before she could argue, he tossed her a flash drive. "Everything, coordinates, reports. It's time the world knew." She looked into his eyes, searching for even the smallest sign of fear. There was none. Rex nudged her knee gently. Time was up. They fled out the rear, disappearing into the trees. Emma didn't look back, but as the cabin shrank behind them and gunfire cracked in the distance, she realized something. These dogs weren't just survivors. They were witnesses, and someone wanted them erased for what they remembered. As Emma paused to catch her breath halfway through the ravine trail, she noticed Rex stop cold, his ears alert, eyes fixed on a spot just beyond the ridge. Shadow barked once. From the dark, a low growl answered. Another dog, not wild, trained. Someone or something was waiting ahead. Emma crouched low in the underbrush, her breath steady but shallow. The snow muffled everything, except for the sound of her heart pounding and the faint crunch of movement ahead. Shadow remained beside her, tense but calm. Rex, however, had gone still. His body coiled, his gaze focused like a laser. The growl they'd heard wasn't feral. It was controlled, deliberate. A warning. Then it stepped into view. Another German shepherd, black and tan, bearing the same body language, the same scars as Rex. But its eyes lacked warmth, cold, professional. And flanking him, 2 more, equally silent, equally deadly. Their posture betrayed it. Former canines, repurposed for something far darker. Emma slowly raised her hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." But the dogs didn't move. They were waiting for a command. Then came the voice. "You always did underestimate what we were building, Emma." Out from behind a snow-dusted birch tree walked a tall man in a long, dark coat. His boots crunched softly, rhythmically. His face remained half obscured by the fur-lined collar, but Emma recognized the voice instantly. "Colonel Hayworth," she muttered. "You're supposed to be in prison," he smirked. "Amnesty, technically? Government gets nervous when its best projects start unraveling." He gestured to the dogs beside him. "Meet Unit Echo, retired early after your little expose went viral, but still very loyal, provided you use the right handler." Shadow stepped forward and let out a low, warning bark. Hayworth chuckled. "That one still got fire. I like it. But Rex, he was always the most conflicted. Weren't you, boy?" Rex tensed, but didn't move. Emma could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Training versus instinct. Memory versus present. "You're wasting time," Emma said coldly. "Whatever you're after, it ends here." Hayworth sighed. "You still think this is about justice? No, it's about control. You broke the chain once, but these dogs, every one of them, is a blueprint, and someone very rich wants that blueprint erased." He took out a device, a small black remote. "Drop that," Emma snapped, rising slightly, but Hayworth's thumb hovered above the button. Failsafe, he said calmly. If I go down, they stop breathing. All of them. Rex growled now, a deep, guttural sound that echoed across the clearing. You wouldn't, Emma said. Hayworth smiled. Would I? Suddenly, a blur of movement. Rex lunged. The moment shattered. The other dogs snapped into motion, but not to attack Rex. Instead, they hesitated. Confusion rippled through them. One broke rank, then another. Hayworth shouted a command, but it was too late. Rex had gone for the wrist, not the throat. The remote tumbled into the snow, lost. Shadow joined the fight, intercepting one of the approaching shepherds. But instead of full combat, the dogs danced, assessed. Emma realized they weren't attacking with full force. They were testing each other. Rex barked, short, sharp, a signal. Emma grabbed the remote, fingers scrambling over the casing. She found a switch and slid it just in case. The LED light went red. She crushed it under her boot. Hayworth lunged, drawing a concealed pistol, but a gunshot rang out before he could raise it. Colonel Briggs emerged from the trees, wounded but standing. You forgot about me, he said grimly. Hayworth dropped. Silence fell. The remaining shepherds stood in place, unsure. One approached Rex slowly, tail low, not in submission but in recognition. Briggs limped forward. They're not killers, not without orders. Emma nodded. And the ones giving orders are gone. She looked around. The forest was still. The fight, for now, was over. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the world finally understanding what these dogs had endured and what they were capable of when freed from the leash of control. Just as Emma turned to lead the group back down the slope, Rex suddenly stopped, his ears flicking back. Shadow froze too. From deep within the trees came a sound, a low, metallic hum, almost imperceptible. Emma narrowed her eyes. What now? The humming intensified, a mechanical whine layered beneath the wind's moan. Emma froze, glancing between Rex and Shadow, whose alert postures confirmed what she feared. Something was coming. Briggs raised his rifle. Drone, Emma shook her head. Too low, too heavy. Then it appeared. A matte black all-terrain vehicle emerged from the trees, tires crunching over ice, its frame bristling with antennae and hidden compartments. It wasn't military issue, at least not anything standard. It moved with unsettling precision, stopping exactly 10 feet from where Hayworth's body lay in the snow. The engine idled. The doors didn't open. Emma instinctively took a step in front of Rex and the others, shielding them with her body. Briggs, now pale and swaying, squinted through the scope. No markings, not ours. Could be private militia, or worse. A faint hiss escaped the vehicle. The passenger door unlocked with a soft click. Out stepped a woman in a grey coat. Her demeanor was eerily calm, her heels somehow stable on the snow. Sunglasses obscured her eyes, but her smile was one Emma had seen before. In classified briefings, in whistleblower testimonies, in nightmares. Dr. Wallace, Briggs said, jaw clenched. Emma's stomach turned. Wallace had been the architect behind the behavioral override project, the one Hayworth had enforced, but that Wallace had designed. She was the mind behind the madness. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood beside Hayworth's lifeless form. She crouched, checked his pulse, then calmly took the crushed remote from the snow. You always did underestimate your targets, Roger, she muttered. Then she stood and turned to face the group. I see some of my work survived, she said, eyes scanning the dogs. Unexpected, but not uninteresting. Emma stepped forward. It's over, Wallace. We've got recordings, documents, evidence. You can't hide anymore. Wallace smiled thinly. Emma, always so confident. And yet, here you are, with a wounded soldier, a handful of semi-functional dogs, and no official backup. She tapped the side of her coat. A tiny red light blinked once. Your GPS jammers were clever, but you really think I'd come unprepared? Emma raised her chin. Prepared for what? Wallace didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the dogs. Rex, she said gently, Protocol Sigma 4. Rex growled instantly, stepping backward. Shadow leapt between them, barking in defiance. Wallace's smile didn't falter. You may have freed them temporarily, but their training was deeper than you realize. Emma felt panic rise. She reached into her coat, pulled out the chip scanner she'd kept hidden. She waved it over Rex's neck. The signal blinked, active. "They still have the implants," she whispered. Briggs cursed under his breath. Wallace tapped a control pad. "I can override every instinct they've learned since one command, one signal, and your precious K9 heroes become executioners again." Emma's hand trembled. Rex growled louder. The others were circling, torn between confusion and tension. Then Emma made a decision. She dropped the scanner. "Rex," she said calmly, "you know me. Look at me." His ears twitched. He looked. "You're not theirs anymore," she whispered. "You're free. You choose now." The others watched. Wallace's control pad began to blink erratically. "What?" she hissed. Emma stepped forward. "We've been tracking their neural reconditioning, rewiring it naturally, with memory, with real connection. That bond overrides even your failsafe," Rex barked. One short, defiant sound. Then he lunged, not at Wallace but at her control pad. She screamed and dropped it just as he snatched it with his teeth and crushed it into the snow. A second later, the remaining shepherds moved in, forming a loose semicircle around her, not attacking but guarding. Briggs steadied his aim. "Try anything." Wallace looked around, realizing her leverage was gone. "They're just animals," she hissed. Emma's eyes burned. "No, they're survivors, and they finally have a voice." Wallace was escorted to the SUV by Briggs at gunpoint, but just as she stepped inside, she turned back one last time. "You think this ends here," she said, eyes narrowing. "But you never found the second site." Emma stiffened. "What site?" Wallace only smiled as the door slammed shut and the vehicle drove into the snowy woods. Rex's ears twitched again. Shadow growled softly. Emma's gut twisted. There was more, and it wasn't over. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. The trees whispered under the weight of snow, and Emma stood in the middle of the clearing, still staring at the trail of tire marks left by Wallace's vehicle. Briggs secured the last zip tie on Hayworth's arms. Though unconscious, the man was still breathing, barely. Emma checked Rex once more, running her gloved fingers down his side. The fur was matted with a bit of blood, but nothing life-threatening. Shadow leaned against her leg, offering a silent reassurance. Briggs straightened up. "So what now?" Emma turned her eyes toward the direction Wallace had vanished. "Now we find that second site." "You think she was bluffing?" Emma shook her head. "Not her style. Wallace doesn't bluff. She hints, she tempts, and she always has a backup plan." Briggs glanced at the dogs. "We can't keep moving with them. They need rest." "We can't wait either," Emma replied. "If she gets there first, who knows what she'll activate." At that moment, Bear, one of the younger shepherds, whined sharply. His nose was to the ground, tail rigid. He barked once and sprinted toward the trees. "Bear!" Briggs called out, but Emma was already running after him. The others followed. Bear stopped at the edge of a hollow, where a trapdoor was half hidden beneath pine needles and frozen moss. He pawed at it frantically. Emma dropped to her knees and brushed away the snow. The trapdoor had no handle, just a metal surface with a faint fingerprint reader. Long dead, no power. Briggs stepped up. "Looks old, military grade. Could be one of the first off-grid command units." Emma examined it. This could be it. The dogs sniffed the air, agitated. Shadow growled. Emma turned to Briggs. "We'll need to blow it." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? I'm not leaving until we know what's inside." They retreated a safe distance. Briggs set the charges. The explosion was controlled, just enough to break the seal without collapsing the shaft. Dust settled. Emma descended first, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. What she saw chilled her. Rows of glass chambers, dozens of them, all empty, save for the dark stains where something had once been. On the far wall, screens flickered, powered by a weak backup generator. Security footage, schematics, data logs. Briggs whistled low behind her. This wasn't just a holding site, it was a breeding program. Emma scrolled through the logs. Project Helix, behavioral splicing, advanced augmentation. She opened one of the recent entries. Subject, K9X15 status, relocated location, redacted. Relocated, she said aloud. They're still out there. One screen shifted to show the interior of another facility. It was more advanced, cleaner, and far more active. Wallace's voice echoed from a log entry. The failure in Sector 4 was unfortunate, but the newer models have corrected the loyalty issues. We no longer need to condition through trauma. Now they imprint directly onto authority. Emma's blood ran cold. Briggs looked at her. We have to destroy this place. Emma hesitated. And alert every media outlet we can. They need to see what's happening. They rigged the base to collapse. As they emerged into the snowy night, the dogs stood waiting, ears perked, eyes watchful. Shadow walked beside her, nuzzling her hand. Rex limped, but refused to be carried. They watched together as the explosion echoed through the forest, the trapdoor buckling inward, smoke curling toward the sky. Symbolic, Briggs muttered. But it won't be enough. Emma nodded. Not yet. That night, as they set up camp on the ridge, Emma flipped through a final data file recovered from the underground lab. A photo caught her eye, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, standing next to one of the newer K9s, its eyes gleaming unnaturally red. The caption read, Imprint phase. Initiated. Emma's hand tightened on the tablet. The date on the photo was tomorrow. Morning broke over the ridge with a hazy gold glow, soft snowflakes falling in slow spirals. Emma hadn't slept. Neither had the dogs. Her eyes were fixed on the coordinates embedded in the data file from the facility. It pointed to a suburban town about 60 miles east. A private compound hidden behind a vet clinic, disguised as a rehabilitation center for aggressive dogs. But Emma knew better. That clinic was Wallace's new base. They drove in silence. Briggs behind the wheel, Emma scanning every road sign. Rex lay across the back seat, patched up and alert, his eyes never leaving the window. Shadow sat upright, tense. Bear panted, eager. As they arrived at the outskirts of the town, Emma's heart sank. School buses moved through intersections. People walked dogs down sidewalks. Children laughed in driveways. Everything looked normal, but something wasn't right. The building they sought stood behind a black metal fence. A sign read, Advanced Behavioral Training, Private Clients Only. Emma climbed out, clipboard in hand, posing as a behaviorist for a fictitious shelter. She walked toward the reception area as Briggs circled the perimeter. Inside, a young receptionist smiled warmly. Can I help you? Yes, Emma replied. We're evaluating facilities for government-certified rescue programs. I'd love to tour your kennels. The girl hesitated. I'm not sure. Behind her, a door opened. Wallace appeared. She smiled. Cold. Calculated. Well, look who finally caught up. Emma didn't flinch. You're trespassing federal jurisdiction. And you're bluffing, Wallace said smoothly. But I admire the effort. Emma stepped closer. You're conditioning animals using trauma imprinting. What you've done is criminal. Wallace's expression didn't change. We've created loyalty, pure and incorruptible, and soon we won't need to hide. Just then, Rex let out a low growl from the hallway. A security officer emerged, weapon drawn. Emma didn't wait. She spun, slamming her clipboard into the guard's arm. The gun fell, Rex lunged. Chaos exploded. Briggs charged through the rear entrance with Bear and Shadow. Alarms blared. Kennel doors flew open. Dogs, some calm, others clearly altered, barked, howled, and ran. In the chaos, Emma chased Wallace down a back hallway. The woman moved with surprising speed, slipping through a steel door and locking it behind her. But Emma had seen enough. They secured the facility, cuffed the staff, and called federal backup using Briggs's emergency SAT beacon. It was over, or so she thought. As she exited the building, a convoy of SUVs pulled up. But instead of relief, her stomach turned. No agency markings, no uniforms. Wallace was being escorted by men in suits. Emma stepped forward. "What is this?" One of the men turned. "Ma'am, you've done well, but this is now above your clearance. You can't be serious." Wallace, bleeding but grinning, leaned close as she passed. "Told you, we don't need to hide anymore." Emma's hand reached for her badge, but Briggs grabbed her wrist. "Not now," he whispered. "They're not bluffing." They watched in stunned silence as the vehicles disappeared down the road, leaving only tire tracks and a rising sense of dread. That night, back at their temporary base, Emma sat beside the fire. The dogs rested nearby, quiet but uneasy. She opened her laptop. A file blinked on the screen. One last data packet, unmarked, untraceable. It contained a list, over 200 names, all linked to Wallace's project. But at the very top was a name that made Emma's blood run cold. Her own. The fire crackled softly as Emma sat alone, the glow flickering across her determined face. Around her, Titan, Shadow, Rex, and Bear rested, their bodies relaxed but their eyes alert, ever watchful protectors of a world that didn't yet understand their true purpose. The list on her laptop had shattered any illusions she held about safety or control. This was no longer just a fight for her dog's survival. It was a battle for the truth, a truth that had become dangerously personal. Emma knew the road ahead would be treacherous. Powerful forces lurked behind the curtain, wielding influence, money, and secrets that could crush anyone who dared to expose them. But she also knew this. She was no longer alone. With every bark, every loyal gaze, every silent vigil, her dogs stood with her, not just as companions, but as warriors bound by honor and love. The world needed to hear their story. Not just the story of bullies underestimating 2 German shepherds, but the tale of resilience, loyalty, and courage forged in the crucible of war and betrayal. A story that showed how love could survive attempts to erase it, how memory could outlast manipulation, and how the fiercest defenders often come on 4 paws. As she closed her laptop, Emma reached for the collar Rex had worn on his first mission, a symbol of sacrifice and survival. She clipped it to her belt, a reminder of everything at stake. Her gaze drifted to the window where snow began to fall softly once more. Outside, the night was quiet, but the fight was far from over. If this story of bravery, loyalty, and unbreakable bonds moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share this video. Your support helps bring more true stories of heroes, both human and canine, to light. Have you ever witnessed a moment where animals showed courage beyond what you imagined? Tell us your story in the comments below. We read every one and believe in the power of these connections. Don't miss our next video. The farmer bought an old dog out of pity, never imagining the shocking secret it was hiding. Another unforgettable story of loyalty and heart that will inspire you. Thank you for watching, and remember, true courage often comes with a wagging tail.